afternoon. My name is Bahman Yazdanfar, and this is Turner on the Weekly Show, brought to you by my colleague John Hardy and I on a weekly basis to discuss the human elements and the interaction between humans, especially when it comes to larger organization, when these elements could affect the productivity of the company or that organization for that matter. In last 2 or 3 weeks, we focus on talking about the certain habits that individuals, or all of us, we are creatures of our own habits, have, and the source of the habits. We discussed about the crowd thinking last week, that how this crowd thinking and some call it mob mentality, some call it crowd intelligence, how depending which side of the ring they are standing on. And this week we are going to talk about how we can, after knowing all of that, even though we know that, why we cannot apply it in our daily basis, or if there is a way, how we can use certain methodology to ease our ease and limit, bring our limit to some extent lower than in regards to our aggravation that we have during our encounter with our colleagues, our friends, or our bosses, or employees. So, John, you were talking about the how to use it, how we are going to use that. Is there any method that we can get rid of our habits?
Well, I think getting rid of our habits, it's more understanding what they are. Just even knowing what our habits are is already a huge plus. Because essentially, if you look at behavior, it's a collection of habits. That's what it is. It's habitual, recurring behaviors are effectively habits. That's what a personality ultimately is. If you were to eliminate all your habits, you essentially would be just neutral. I mean,
it's a noble idea.
It's a noble idea, and God knows you've been working on it for years.
Yeah.
But the thing is, to the extent that you would succeed, you'd be unwatchable.
So and what?
You would be unwatchable because there would be nothing to watch. It wouldn't be interesting. There would be no characteristic pattern. So you still have.
That is why nobody wants to talk to me there.
Well, that's a different reason. The problem is that the habits that have remained, you got rid of the wrong ones.
Okay.
So you have to. No, but to be fair,
off the train of your thought. Let me bring you back to the train of thought. Last week on our show we discussed.
The train today is just fixing bombing. Period.
Last week we talked about all of those habits that we are aware of, but what you are saying is understanding that we have habit and which one we want to keep or which one we don't want to keep. But why people don't admit the certain habits that is destructive and they keep doing it then?
Well, I think just vanity. I mean, I think the one consistent thing. I don't know. You remember in sales they teach everybody that everybody wants to look good and be right, right? So if you want to sell something to somebody and you want to create rapport, the last thing you want to make them feel is either that they don't come off looking good, or that they're wrong.
Okay.
So everyone has this thing. So, and yet then at the same time, if you were to ask anybody, they'd say, well, do you have a good sense of humor? Do you have an honest opinion of yourself? Are you a good friend? Are you a good father? Etc. Etc. They would all basically pass a lie detector test. And in saying that, yes, they are. The vast majority would perceive themselves to be good, and yet we know, just by experience of what's around them, statistically, that 95% of them at least are wrong, right? So therefore, what is the constant? That everybody thinks they're already there, and that very belief that they're already there, the very belief that they're already these perfections, is what makes it absolutely sure they won't get there, right?
So it is a false perception alongside of the being delusional about their surroundings and how they're being perceived.
Delusional about everything. The only thing is that they're not all delusional uniquely, that somehow the crowd is sharing common delusions, right? Because if everybody was just uniquely delusional and psychotic, traffic wouldn't run. You would just be all over the place. But the very fact that, let's just say, you go to a city like Cairo, you got these millions of cars, and they're all cramming in, and to the point where they're not even obeying the lights because there's no way that they could and still keep moving, and it just flows. there's got to be some kind of sort of collective instinct that's taking place, and it's harmonizing all these vanities, right? So there's all these vanities, they're all uniform. At the same time, you were to just go down to the individual in the crowd, he experiences himself as an individual. And yet, when you lift up a little bit from the crowd with a little perspective, you see that there's nothing vaguely in the individual about anything that you see here, right?
Two shows ago we discussed like a teenagers when they want to be rebel about their parents, and then in the school yet they
how do we apply this? Thing then is to say that if we let's go back now to the three typologies. We've got the trooper. Let's just say the main person in the crowd, the everyman, is basically the trooper. And then you have those two other types, the player and the outsider. Now, the players and the outsiders are not in the crowd. They're in the crowd, but they're not in the crowd. They are very aware of what's going around, right? So for instance, even the player who's a manipulator, a skilled manipulator on some level has to be able to get past their own delusion on some level, because they have to be in some way focusing on the other just enough to manipulate them. So in that sense, the player has an awareness greater than the average.
Or at least aware of the shortcomings of the troopers.
Whatever, but at least they're still even concerned about. Most of the troopers are so self-preoccupied, they don't see anything other than themselves. And that's what makes them so easy to manipulate, right? Now, then you have the outsider, who is basically so different than this crowd, he doesn't somehow respond to this frequency that the whole crowd is at. He's separate and distinct. He doesn't even know why, he just is, or she. Okay, well, so now you have these two. So when you're engaging in the world, it's important to know who you're engaging with. So if you're an outsider, and to a large extent, what we're talking about, and even the people watching this station, are almost immediately qualifying the fact that if they came here more than once, that they're outsiders or soon to be.
Oh, we are that unique. Yeah. That is why our rating is low.
Well, and the moment it gets high, we just will lose our credibility altogether. So thank God for that.
Oh yes, for millions of people who are watching.
Before we actually become, the throngs, discover us, as some kind of curiosity. Well, so now what happens is if you're the outsider, and you're engaging with the world, now it's about deciding who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a trooper or you're dealing with a player. Well, now, two different protocols you have to actually operate in. If you're dealing with a player, you have to realize that you're dealing with someone who has a communication that is two-tiered. On the one hand, it's presenting an image. It's presenting, it's conveying an impression. On the other hand, it's extending, trying to figure out how they can use you.
Who are we talking?
Whoever you are, right?
Okay.
So player engages with you and basically is asking himself, it's a very simple protocol that I think that goes through their head. It's, can you be of use to me? Now, if you're another player, that's one thing that they'll say. If they identify another player, that's another. They're of the same tribe. But everybody else is a mark that is to be used if they are of use.
Okay.
Right? So, as an outsider, you are to a player sort of this nut who, by and large, is of no use whatsoever, except that maybe if you happen to have some special skill
that he or she can use
exactly
on his or her own advantage.
And then what they'll do is they will pretend to be impressed with you, and they'll, an example, if that player would see the outsider and perceive them to be of use, one of the things that the player would do is feign interest in what the outsider is doing. So an example, you get one of these nerds who all of a sudden becomes a .com millionaire, who otherwise would be in no interest to sort of a sexy player chick, right? But now all of a sudden, he's Zuckerberg or something like that, and he's not what he was before he's famous. Now he's the guy, right? Now, all of a sudden, that same woman is going to find him and his interests fascinating. And the thing is that in general, I mean, the outsider too has a vanity to deal with. They have a lot of vanity, and they have their own narcissism. And it's generally starved for attention. And so when somebody shows interest, for instance, particularly attractive woman,
They won't compensate for the work
then
they lost
it's
time.
exactly, they want to make up for you because they're just thinking, oh my God, finally God is, giving me my just reward,
That
etc.
is my time.
And then in an ironic way, they are getting a just reward for their vanity, which is they're going to get taken down hard. So what happens is that there will be a natural foil, so that there will be this feigned interest that will be shown. Then what will happen is that they will get dominance in that relationship, because I think there's a natural...
The player.
Yep, and there's a natural submissiveness somehow or other in the outsiders because of the fact that they're somehow used to being one down. It's just something that's becomes so much part of their experience that in a way they believe it or not, they actually come to believe it's true in a weird way.
Let me ask you, maybe let me bring my other side out.
Bashman. Oh, good. I was wondering.
The bashman is out.
You couldn't. I can already see the physicality.
The posture changes immediately. The eye glows changes.
Clearly.
The eyebrow moving.
Slightly cross-eyed.
Yeah. Based on 50 some odd years of my own experience, different countries, different situations, different families, different family orientation or lack thereof. My findings, please tell me if you disagree with it, that every one of us, regardless of if you put them in one of those categories, in those hierarchy of the orientation based on their functionality to each other, like either is trooper or player or the outsider, all human, I think it is in something in the DNA of the human, or at least as a part of their upbringings, that they are always in a state of using others for their own advantage. And let me clarify by that, so we remove the doubt of the just money. I'm not talking about money. You talk about a mother and father. You're talking about brother and sister. You're talking about the friends and family. You're talking about colleagues.
So relationships of all kinds.
It doesn't matter with all this. Always, if someone asks someone about something in any form and shape, sales orientated or not, always it is self-indulgence is part of it, or at least base of it for me. Now,
Now, I don't fully agree, but go on.
Okay.
Yeah. But
many people don't agree with me because it's very hard to, as you said at the beginning, it's very hard to admit which habit we have that habit.
No, and it's not a very pretty way of looking at the world.
No, it's not, but it is the way it is, the way that I look at it. It doesn't mean that I change my outlook from every human being. What I'm saying is the only level of the expertise or skillfulness and the level of the greed to that self-indulgence is vary. I think all of these three orientation that you present is just representative of the scale of the who uses how much of that basic instincts.
Okay, I would say with respect to looking at other people as being there for their benefit. Okay, so if we reframe that as that, obviously the player is is unabashedly doing so, right?
Of course.
He's the extreme.
Knowingly,
even though they won't admit to it afterwards.
Of course, they do
it 24/7.
Of course.
It's like all they do. Okay.
Have you seen any politician say they did wrong?
Yeah, no, precisely. So that's the player. But
and by the way, just without using it, when you ask a politician that so and so it happened, like recently they asked Clinton, you say that was wrong, not me. I was wrong. That was wrong.
Completely.
Yeah.
That's part of the
so we know
bubble.
the system. They never admit.
That's the player. So that's a simple case. No, that's not a challenge. If we look at the trooper, we're looking at somebody who, say alpha trooper, person who's into super competence, high achiever. Could be a senior executive, could be a lawyer, doctor, everything like that, surgeon. So it's a guy who's about being excellent, right? Not about manipulating others. Now there's vanity in that he's proud of his excellence. but is he doing his excellence for the benefit of humanity, or so that people will love him more, right? So,
or his own feelings.
No, but
his
or
satisfaction.
No, well, but even his satisfaction is based on look at me, right?
Yeah.
So on a social
Which
level,
vanity comes back to vanity.
it comes down to vanity, and of course, I agree with you that there's a strong element of that in the trooper, I would say, in the sense that because they're basically oriented all the time to the group, they're not internally driven, really. They're constantly referencing back to the group. They want to be rewarded for what they do. They
recognize for what they do.
etc., etc. Now, I would say the possible exception to that, not in all cases, is the outsider. And I would say the outsider is the only potential exception. And I remember we had a conversation about this, and I was saying that, let's say, when we're getting to the whole issue of altruism, does altruism exist? And I think, Freud made this argument too. There was no such thing as altruism because of the good feeling you got. Even when you gave, you got the good feeling out of giving, and therefore that was built into the action.
That is my argument to some extent too.
And then there's the whole issue of, well, and philosophers have discussed this too, early 19th, middle 19th century, I think. Dostoevsky looks at this, Schopenhauer looked at this. The major philosophers in the 19th century are looking at this idea of, and love thy neighbor as thyself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how is this possible?
Confucius.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is that central thing, what we're talking about, because that's the understanding of altruism. Now, this is where the understanding, I think, of our concept of who we are becomes critical. To the extent that we experience ourselves as these sentient beings which are created out of whatever, dust, and out of nature and nurture in various measure, we are then generated into these beings like Dawkins would have us, then no, of course. I mean, these beings basically wish to survive, have these basic drives, and they respond in relation to those drives, right? And the lower part of ourselves, all of us have an aspect of this, which is more or less where we start our lives, for most of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say those who actually reach transcendence, right? So let's say who the monks or Satori, the ones who reach Satori, the Zen monks, are able to reach a place where, and in fact other people can do it on occasion, but they're able to reach a place where they've reached a higher part of the self. And this higher part of the self is connected instantly to all other selves. So they no longer experience themselves, but very literally. It's not just perception. It's much deeper than just local perception. They no longer experience themselves as a separate being. And if we take a look at how we define the human being, right? Mm-hmm. If we define the human being in isolation, right? It's very difficult because in isolation, the human being doesn't even exist. That you just, if you were alone on a planet, you wouldn't last long. Even if you could, get sustenance, even if basically the food was there, everything. Just being alone with absolutely no reference point would be just sheer hell. You wouldn't, even your identity, everything would have no context, no meaning. Now, so if we take a look at our lives, the quality of our lives are based on relationship. Generally speaking, right?
Actually, I should show you one of another poem that I wrote about 20 some other about them. We are social being beasts.
So we're essentially, and Adler argued that exactly that thing. The philosopher and psychiatrist. So, since we're social beings, and if we define ourselves then as, instead of as a separate unit, but as a kind of nexus of relationships with all the people around us, well then in actual fact, thinking of the other at the same time as ourselves is not so, counterintuitive, because of the fact that we're sort of intrinsically connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the same way, let's say we take a look at a mother and a child, right? Now, the narcissistic mother will look at the child as an extension of themselves, will love the child because it's an extension of themselves, and how you get to see they're narcissistic is at the moment that the child does not reflect back that which they want, all of a sudden love is cut off, right?
Or the father, they want to live his dream through his son or
No,
something.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the mother, let's say, where, generally. But let's just say the loving mother has the capacity to see the child as a separate being, intricately connected, understands the child for its own sake, its own essence and potential, and sacrifices herself for that child to fulfill that destiny or that potential, right?
Okay.
So if we compare those two mothers, and it's a rare mother who's the second one, that's a given. And I'm just picking up mothers, fathers,
Mm-hmm. No, I understand.
even less so. But I think in today's world, the mothers have
It is
changed.
the ones that really some argue it
But-
is without condition.
Exactly.
All of that.
That's the true unconditional love. It does exist. Now, it doesn't mean that that woman, is going to convey, exhibit that behavior towards everybody around her, and it can be selective. Whereas opposed to the monk or the person who's gone through Satori, it's universal. They're going to engage with the whole human race like that. Whereas for most people, in between, and this is, I would say, what's the distinction. If you're in the player range, not. But if you're in that that other range, what will happen is that there will be moments of it for people where they will sort of ascend beyond themselves, their lower self. Often not, most of the time not, but even, I would say most people, at some points, yes, they can.
I don't disagree with the issue of we are social being creatures.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with the issue of we are like elephant, let's say,
Yeah.
or herd of elephants. We need to have each other, but because of the ability to speak, to have a language, to construct, so we can construct past and we can imagine about the future. And that ability gives us a different disposition from other animals. And that disposition make us, regardless of even if we transcend above ourselves, still we are thinking of accomplishing something within ourselves. That means we achieve something. But my argument is not that human beings are not able to do that, either for someone. My argument is people don't want to admit it.
Admit what?
That when they do something, either it's for someone else or for the welfare of someone else or has a benefit for someone else, is it not totally for them?
Or, okay, I would say, yeah. Like, it's just like cowardice, right? I mean,
Before you go to answer, and the reason I bring that up a couple times, because when you go to a workplace or environment that a group of people have to work with each other for 6-7 hours a day or 10 hours a day, this part of the instincts cause a lot of problem and the conflicts without even being brought up.
No, absolutely. And I was just thinking about, let's say in the game, like what is the lowest human quality, right? The one that we despise the most in the human
Lawyers?
being. No, but is cowardice, right?
Oh, no,
Right?
I thought you said the people.
No, but people. But let's just say it's cowardice, right? Cowardice is just detested, right? Cowardice is just the low of the low. Interestingly enough, it's an inherently human characteristic because fear exists in animals. But an animal can't be cowardly. Because I was thinking, what is cowardice? And my interpretation of cowardice is a combination of fear and the denial of that fear, right?
Fear is natural and
Exactly.
good defense mechanism in a human being.
Exactly, but it's the denial of it. So let's just say anyways, something comes, army comes, you run, right? You don't stand, you run. Now, to the extent that you ran, okay, it's fear. But to the extent that you say that I ran because I was really thinking of protecting someone else, or you give you...
Okay, that's a good example.
Yeah, right?
I was looking for a child to protect you.
Yeah, exactly, because I was looking for precisely something like that, right? Now, if you say that and then you believe it, the problem then will be is that the next time you're going to do the same thing, right? Whereas, if you run, and there's movies about this too, where like the Four Feathers, if you run and ultimately you know that you behaved in a way that you're not proud of, then there's this tension that's created where now you're going to have to change something. If you are going to have the strength, right, to be able to engage with it, then you can admit it. But if you're so weak that you basically don't believe underneath that you're going to be able to change that, then it's almost like the only place you can go to is denial. And so interestingly, part of being a coward is deceit and manipulation. They all go together.
Which comes hand to hand, of course. But
and I would say this aspect is what we're talking about in the human being. It's their cowardice in light of admitting. There's a perfect example of a situation where this is what noble behavior is. This is ignoble. They cannot see anything that they've done as ignoble because now that would compromise their image of themselves, and so they have to somehow turn events around in a way that they can protect their self-image. And then if a crowd does this, right? When a crowd commits these crimes, then the crowd will collectively do this.
And become norm.
And that's essentially how atrocities are committed, and how in societies people turn into informers, and how all these totalitarian societies actually operate is on this aspect of human nature.
But I want to bring this issue a little bit in the more eye level environment. When we are talking about the troops, when we are talking about the war, which I have been in an environment that this kind of atrocity has happened, I can not necessarily admit, but I can understand one could behave differently than the normal situation.
Yeah.
But what we just described, it happens even for the pettiest stuff.
Oh, this is an extreme case, but even the smaller, it's the same
and
principle.
That is why I personally get sometimes ticked off if someone sits in front of me and eye to eye and tell me I did cook, for instance, something, and I said, okay, how was it? Oh, I did it for my neighbor or my this or for my that. You don't have to lie about that. I mean, lying for me is, as you said, deceit and manipulation and all of that. Lying is really make all of those elements very evident that what the person stands for. For instance, if you have a issue with your brother or sister or father or mother, and then there is a certain amount of the reasoning and logic involved, either it is disputing over the property or disputing over the family affair or whatever.
Right.
Then the moment someone is, let's say, get to the point that understands that he or she was mistaken, or that moment and has to give up something, no matter how small it is. At that moment,
some admission.
One sentence changes all. It says, I am doing you a favor to do that, or I am doing it because I don't want to see you hurt. Or I am doing
no
that,
offense,
but no offense. I don't want to waste all the. You see, all sorts of these excuses. For some reason, I do not understand what is wrong with the pure, unvarnished truth. That this mass, I am talking about these troopers that you are talking about. I am talking about the mass as a society that tries to avoid.
You know what's interesting is you say that. You're right. Because and maybe what it is this, is everybody's pretending, right? It's just like in every family.
It's a movie.
No, and you think about a family, right?
Yeah.
And, somebody dies and all of a sudden they become a saint, right?
That is, I am going to tell you something after you finish talking.
So, father dies, grandmother dies, and somehow or other she becomes Mother Teresa. Was wonderful, regardless of, the kind of awful woman she might have been, right? So everybody's holding this. Now, part of the reason why they're really holding this is that there's some kind of connection they feel, and they don't want to admit that because somehow it reflects on them too. And so that there's this kind of front party line that they wish to maintain to the rest of the world, pride of the family, which because they associate themselves with the family, it's also pride in themselves, their ego, etc. Right? Yeah.
Untold the story of the family that kept
And in the
pride.
meantime, and
Yes.
everything. So what they've got is all these things collectively pushed under the rug because they say it's in our collective interest to present this image outside, right? Now, everybody on some level knows it's a lie
Okay. Yes.
because individually within the family, private conversations will go on nonstop about the truth, about this and that. However, when the family gets together, there's this sort of collective thing that takes place, right? Yeah.
Like group thinking. Thing. Yeah.
A group thing that
Yeah.
takes place. Now what happens is that if some individual, like yourself or like myself, who decides that, you know what, let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
You know, let's just stop.
What it is.
What will happen is instantly, the moment that you engage with this, and God forbid that somebody stranger should be there.
Oh, that
You know,
is the
that would be the death itself.
double jeopardy.
Double jeopardy, right. Then it's like this entire
You're
family
an
becomes
embarrassing
but not
through
only that,
this.
you galvanize them into a mob. And
And
now,
they are mob, actually.
at that point, they become a mob who are ready to kill you at a moment's notice as a treacherous, no good bastard who
that they had no respect for the name of family and all of that, and respect for the dead.
Exactly.
Yep.
In other words, you're basically a monster. And what's fascinating is that they will forgive any sin that you've done to anybody else out there. It could be murder even, sooner, because I'll deny that too, sooner than this. And I think what it is because you're challenging the core lie which underpins all of their egos. And so I think this is it. The ego itself is essentially based in a lie.
You see, that is part that I argue about the altruism.
Doesn't start as a lie, but it somehow takes on a lie.
It's somehow,
Yeah.
when when we were born, we are just kind of the very raw creatures, and somehow
most of us were babies.
Somehow along the way, we adopt this notion that lie always is better than truth. And yet the contradiction when we get to the teachings of the religion and the adulthood, we say, oh no, honesty is the best policy. And then this contradiction is always there and create an internal conflict. But overall society, and I'm not talking about just Toronto, I'm talking about societies.
Okay, but here's the distinction between the outsider and the trooper. In exactly that thing, there's an
they don't do that.
They can't. There's something in them that makes it impossible, and I think part of it is the relationship to the group. That I get the feeling that there's this
because there is no group for them.
No, well there isn't. But I think it's almost like, let's just say there was a part of us that is tuned, that is attuned to the group vibration, right?
Okay.
And in some of it's stronger and some of it's weaker. In the players not so strong, and a lot of the troopers very strong, right? Okay, so what happens then is path of least resistance for a person like that is group thinks that, I think that. At the same time, they're not in any way aware of the contrast because they just immediately are absorbing the group think. They just slip into it effortlessly. Don't see any logical inconsistency, right? Even if it was just shown right to their face. Then there's other people who, for whatever reason, and I think it has to do with this essence, that they're connected to their essence, they just cannot, even, and this is true of every outsider, even from their earliest memory, is looking around saying, this doesn't make sense.
That's correct.
Right? Now, the player basically says, it doesn't make sense. It's a lie. The world is bullshit.
How can I use it?
I'm going to get on the right side of this.
Yeah, how can I use it to use it on my own?
In a sense, they're quite smart, and that's it. They don't have a problem with it.
Doesn't focus on it. So I know what it is, but I am not going to use it.
That's right.
That is the only difference, the decision.
There's no even inclination to use it.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Just it.
That's what I'm saying. The outsider, they say it says it's ridiculous. It's out of my mind.
And also even to use it is disgusting to them.
You said about the funeral. I remember a few years back. I mean, last time I was in a funeral, God knows, maybe 10, 15 years ago. I don't know when was that. But I remember at that time they had all of these black limousines and all of that, and they had a couple of the cops to stop the road because the guy was famous or something. And they said, "Are you coming to the cemetery?" I said, "No, I just came to pay respect to the man, because I really respected him. I didn't have to any."
Yeah.
And I was going by when I was leaving the hall, and they say, "Are you coming?" I said, "No, that is ridiculous. The guy, when he was alive, everybody was talking behind his back. Now everybody now is respecting him. Oh, it's not a good thing to talk about the dead people." I said, "Hitler is dead 70 years ago, and still people talk about him. What is the difference? Either you have a set of rules that you follow, or you don't. If the guy was a scumbag when he was alive, what changed when he died? Is it because of we want to change the perception, as you call it, the image outside?" And by the way, I want to make a point out of that. Most of these images that families think they have, it is a perception of the image they think they have. Because when you go out as a third party and talk to the people who know that family, you find out completely different image is there than they want to believe they have. Which comes...
that's even more sophisticated, but yes, their own perception of their own image.
Which comes back to the illusion that they're talking that people are just walking and they're under illusion.
But I think what happens is that it's almost like one lie begets another, right? Once you start off with illusion...
Yes, it's like a snowballing.
Because you have to add, because at each juncture you come to the point is either you're going to make an admission or add another lie. Add another lie. And so very quickly what happens is you get this hailstone effect of just layers and layers of lies, to the point where very often, they don't even know the original story because it's been retold so many times. I was listening to, let's just say, the other day on the phone of somebody describing the death of her husband, somebody who's very close to me, and I'll tell you, it was fascinating.
Fascinating, laughing, fascinating, or it was tragic, fascinating?
It didn't have, and describing the last few years of his life and everything like that, and I was just thinking, it didn't even have the remotest, vaguest connection to the reality, and yet was told so well, and probably now this person is telling it enough times that it's become
a reality for him.
The party line. And one of the ways you can actually tell the party line is the consistency. Whenever anybody says the same story the same way, you know it's a lie.
If they describe it, yes.
Because it's a frozen story.
I give
even though they might not even perceive it as a lie.
I give you an example of, you know that I don't have any family. I abandoned my family a long time ago. I'm talking about
out of principle.
Out of principle, of course. I don't want someone else telling me what to do. It doesn't matter who that person is. And it was 20, 30 years ago. And I think I mentioned that briefly about the story, but about this perception and the lies that starts. I remember one day I received a phone call about 4 years ago, actually, 2012, around May, that someone who claimed to be my sister's husband said, sorry I bother you, your father passed away in Iran while he was visiting his brothers, my uncles.
Yeah.
And immediately I said, he said, my condolences, and that was about 20, 30 seconds. By the way, he had a lover here, and they had a condominium, and he knew that I did not have any relationship with my father. So all of a sudden, total stranger become a proxy of my sister. And my sister, by the way, is not like a unknown person. She is a doctor in Toronto who had a what is that? In 2007, a patient died in her care for the liposuction. All of this, very terminal disease, liposuction, and she was on the paper for a few years. I don't know what's happened to that. I was not even following that. Anyhow, this gentleman on the phone, we come back to the lie. I asked him why my siblings didn't call me. Well, they asked me to call you, so it is their mourning. That's fine. And he admittedly, he himself, without I ask, he said, I didn't know your father. I just met him 10 times. Maximum 10 times in my life.
But why did he share the fact about your father having had a mistress?
No. He wanted to ask me if I want to get involved in the issue of the property that the mistress or lover or common law might get the property of my father. He wanted to ask me if I want to get involved in the property issue. Again, as you said, the guy didn't know me and he called me all of a blue and discussed these things after 30 seconds of the call. He didn't even at least say, okay, goodbye, and 10 minutes later to call me back and say, okay, now you're calmed down, let's talk about the property. He immediately, anyhow, that was not the issue that I brought it up with, but the issue of he said, I met your father all of my time that I married to your sister for last 12, 13 years, 10 times. That's fine, okay. That issue didn't, the couple telephone calls I didn't mention anything. I never heard from them. Two and a half years, about over 25 months, over 2 years passed. Again, this guy, gentleman, called me. I am not even sure if he's a real husband or pardon my language, a pimp. I don't know, because why my sibling don't call me? And he called me, I have something for you, and I thought maybe there's a picture or something. I went to a coffee shop finally that day. I met him, and he said, well, we are going to put some money for the post-dated check. He asked, your father asked me to give it to you. Well, why you didn't give it to me 2 years ago? And while we are talking, and I'm asking a couple of the qualifying questions like a sales, because it's investigation, he says, oh, I just met your father about 30 or 40 times. And the first thing came to my mind is, the guy must be master of the communication with death. Because he communicated with dead body, not only one time, 20 or 30 times more. And when I picked that up...
And that's when a really strong relationship with the father developed.
They developed to the point that he claims that my father gave him money or something.
You must have had tears in your eyes of joy.
Of course. But we come back to this.
And it nearly caused you to leave abandon your philosophies and cynicism.
I was questioning everything that I learned up to that point. Or rather, it was a form of the extreme validation for me.
Of
everything that I was doing. I said, people like that really always a stamp of approval of what I'm doing.
Every one of your theories
everything I was
person.
doing was correct. So anyhow, the point is, when I went further,
I just didn't go far enough.
A couple days later, they brought the lawyer, and finally they didn't pay, and anyhow. Yeah. Funny thing is, one lie started with second, and that even though I had very limited communication with these people, every single communication they have done is full of lies. And amazingly...
Even when there's no point.
No point. Amazingly, their lawyer write a letter to me, because he didn't want me to contact his clients. Actually, their client contacted me. I didn't go after it. He said, my client was doing you a favor. So what I'm trying to say is
so that's another lie.
When it comes to the lie finds its way like a water close to the thing in the society, among the public. You just incept one lie. That goes with the second one. It is exactly the characteristic of the politics. The reason our political system is so damaged is not because we have crooks as the politicians. We have people who feed these crooks, and that is lie.
You know, I was just thinking. You hear these stories of pedophiles.
That was Bashman, though.
But exactly. So Bashman's out, and alive and well.
Alive and well.
So
bring it on.
Yeah. Ready for fire and brimstone. But I was just thinking about when you think of the most, beyond cowardice, I would say the most disgusting behavior that you can imagine in terms of crime is crimes towards children. So pedophiles, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. Most despicable characters, right? And what's very interesting about these people, though, so often, is that they are in positions of high respect, right? Positions of authority. And probably, though, right up to the point, and even after they're caught, they would experience themselves to be good, decent people. That somehow they would say, well, 95% of the time I'm good, and I've got this unfortunate affliction.
Which is justifiable.
Which
in their mind.
They would say, I remember Ted Bundy, serial killer. He was talking about his, affliction. And remember, at one point he said, look, people have different habits. People have, some people have drugs, some have marijuana, sometimes
This
drink.
is my habit.
For me, this was mine. And, and the funny part is, as he's presenting it, you're sort of just going on thinking, well, he's got a, and then you catch yourself at the sheer craziness and horror of it. But it's said with such an ease.
It's like a circular logic. I bring
and that's
it.
just it. That's the mark exactly of, and in a way to me it's the mark of evil, is that the way evil works is it's almost like human beings are not in and of themselves evil, but what happens is they become like the vector. They become the vehicle, the mosquito carrying the malaria. And those that carry it, then it's convenient somehow. It's so beautifully symmetrical that they've got this perfect denial.
But they infect society.
Oh, well, no, then it spreads.
That is the more important. If as long as it is the self, if it is self-destructive behavior that for instance, if I am alcoholic and going and buy alcohol and live alone, and finally I get a liver cirrhosis and die, there is some inconvenience, some cost to the system. I understand that, but nevertheless, I did not personally go and affected your personal life. But when you are a pedophile, or when you are a thief, or if you are a abuser, you are using another human being in order to satisfy your own habit. So when we are talking about habit, it's not just
an addiction.
This addiction, this habit that become addiction, people could justify it any form and shape they want. But it is a couple questions can really qualify if it is a really a good habit or bad habit, or is it destructive habit or not. Does my habit involve, the question is as follows, does my habit involve someone else?
And that is, well, if we take a look at like an example, let's say addict. So let's take the most extreme example. Let's say the heroin addict, right? You've got this substance that now has taken such control of you that many of these people are willing to commit any crime against anybody, members of their family, steal from them whatever it takes to fulfill it, right? So they're reduced to this, right? Because they don't start out that way. But so many of them are reduced to this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I had first-hand experience with a couple of them.
And I was thinking that what's instructive about it is that all of these kinds of behaviors essentially have exactly that same quality. That somehow it's as if there's a progression. It starts off as sort of a habit, then it sort of goes to something stronger. At first there's sort of boundaries, but as time goes on, it seems to gain momentum.
The threshold of the tolerance goes higher and higher, and that is
and what they're willing to do increases too, to the point where effectively they're willing to do anything, and they become exactly monsters. How the and this is the average person, and I think this is how all these atrocities are committed. Is that what we don't really want to see is that the average person, for the most part, in every culture, has the capacity to become a monster. That is really something that is pretty frightening from that capacity for human beings, and so that they quickly step back from it. Because collectively, even suggesting this, right? Even though I'm stating the obvious, historically we've got so many precedents of it, it's amazing that somebody could even dispute this, and yet, in any crowd, this is something that they will resist.
It's taboo to talk about.
Absolutely. Because it's around the room. In other words, to say that we could all turn into monsters.
After what was it called, the Great War in China, I'm talking about 300 some odd BC. When the philosophers, like European philosopher or Eastern philosopher, when they reflect to some extent the views based on their own political or social environment, and reflect that. That is why we see all sort of the fluctuation in the different ideas between the New Age philosopher rather than the Old Age. Base is the base, but the way they look at it, the lens they look at it. If I'm not pronouncing it wrong, not Hsun Tzu, but Hsun Tzu, one of the philosophers of China said very clearly, mankind inherently is evil. The only reason that he behave himself is because of the either ideology, like a religion, or the laws, or the being a part of the community or a tribe that stops them. That means the mankind, if they lose the conscious part of their mind to control themselves, they are very vicious animals.
Hobbes said the same thing. The English philosopher Hobbes.
Thomas Hobbes, right, that brought the issue of the governing.
That's right, and the idea of the Leviathan and the Commonwealth, and so that the reason that we have the laws is because otherwise it'll be all against all until one only prevails. And so looking at that, looking forward, it means that it's in the interests of everybody except for the one who thinks he might be the one, to actually engage in some kind of restriction, because otherwise they're all losers, right?
Well, that part I disagree with the Hobbes, because of the bringing a government, an entity, to control another one. Those governments consist of another human being too.
It didn't work out. But you say that's the motivation for government. But yeah, I mean, it's something that you, and I think this is the other thing, is that it's this denial of our potential to become monsters that actually allows us to become monsters.
It's like in some societies, even in Canada, in some families, we have 7+ billion people in the planet, and all of them are a result of the sexual intercourse. But when you go to a family and you want to talk about sex or something, it's a taboo. You should not talk about it. So doing it is fine. It's the same principle as the being evil is fine, but talking about the human is bad. It has a bad side. Chris, how are we doing? 6-7 minutes, okay. What we are about, and that is part that I want to bring you back to the trooper thing, as a crowd mentality. I think we give enough lies to our life during the time that we grow up, either from your family or from our sibling or from our colleagues or peers in the school, to the point those lies the same way as the same example you brought about the lady, about the husband and all of that become part of the reality, part of it takes shape in our mind.
Well, it's as real as
it is real.
The chair
it is
or the
anchored.
Us,
it's anchored. I can even tell you the time, day, and exactly what happened. So that lie become a barrier to what really we are. Now, if you put enough of that together, you can make a kind of the complete whole dome of not in front of your pure understanding.
Well, it's exactly like if the people who do this on an individual basis are considered psychotic, right? But if the whole crowd's doing it together,
is norm.
It's what's declared as normal. And Yeah, it's like I mean, what I think in the East they talk about Maya, the perception, well, of that the world is a dream. And once again, it's one of those.
It's a mirage.
It's a mirage. It's
Yeah.
a dream. But one of the problems, once again, is as your awareness increases to the point where you start to engage with that possibility, forget even fully absorbing it, but even the possibility of it. And I remember reading when I was 16, reading Hermann Hesse, and I read Steppenwolf, and then I read Siddhartha, Life of Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember here I was at private school playing tennis at the club, and there I was at the pool, at the tennis club, reading my thing, exactly. About
Buddha, it was a prince himself.
And I was feeling myself also really intellectually superior, because what were all these
you're
other
reading a
clowns?
book.
These other clowns, what are they reading? Comic books or People magazine or whatever it was, right?
I thought you were reading a book.
And then it dawned on me, once I had a little sort of moment of respite from my great complacency, that exactly where was I going to go from here? Because in realizing what they're describing and knowing that this is true, knowing that there's a logic here, I also realized that I start to follow that logic. Where the hell do I end up? Literally in hell. Because this entire world around me now makes no sense. What do I substitute it with? Everything that I basically on a lower level want, I have to give up.
And I am part of it too. That is double whammy.
And I'm even part of it. So basically, I closed the book. I saved myself from further agony.
You didn't read?
I continued to have a very low opinion of those around me, but I decided to cease and
not
desist.
go further.
I decided to look for other reasons to look down on them.
So the altruism was not your
not yet.
your characteristic at that time.
I wasn't ready to go on the path. But then, interestingly enough, as we're describing that, what threw me on the path, I eventually, I remember I was 30, I was in Hungary, after the fall of communism, going through these experiences, I pick up Jung, and as I'm starting to read Jung,
now you have better understanding what he says.
I realized at that point I had to continue. It's like life had pushed me to the point, and I'd seen certain things where it's just you realize, you know what, I can't deny it anymore, I have to go. And as I was reading Jung and I started to read it, I realized this means rethinking everything. And I remember I was around 30.
Rebirth of the mind, yes.
And of course,
I was in the same age.
Things certainly didn't, take off from there. That's when I was thinking, if my life up to that point was rocky, what happened after that was just, like, in other words, before it was like this, now it was more like a shot downwards, but fast.
No, that is understandable because up to that point you were being supported by your surroundings. Now you're getting out of the surrounding and questioning everybody else up to that point. So it's like that funeral thing that if a stranger is there, you started to talk, not to just a small family, to the whole clan of the human mankind.
But also what I had was this delusion that somehow or other, because I was this super being with a great destiny, somehow or other there had to be a happy ending. And so that as I was in these various adventures, I had this sense of disbelief. This is not really happening, but there will be a happy ending. I just have to stay in long enough. Well, after one slap after another, you start to realize that whenever this happy ending is coming, it might not be coming as soon.
Long overdue.
But it might be long overdue, but I might still have a long time before it actually comes.
Well, the only thing that keeps us waking up, at least from perspective of the outsider, is the hope. That is the only thing.
And you know what's even good? The other thing too is this is why it's really good to believe in several lifetimes, because this way, even if you miss this bus,
that could play the double-sided, because if you know that you have extra time, it's like they extended the time of the examination, so I don't have to study. That could.
You know what? We'll give this one a pass.
Okay, folks, that was for the program for today, Tuesday, 15th of March 2016. We now know, at least to some extent, that lies, at least as one of the habits, among many, that we try to color it white, gray, or any other color to get by every day is not really helps us in the long run. In the next week we are going to discuss a little bit further about how we can overcome this this tendency of the genetic tendency, rather, if we can, maybe provide a couple of the practice. Maybe it's helpful. Thank you and good night. Please tune in next week, same place, same time.
Got my city, got my sin, got my baby, I'm rolling in. Well, she's gone on high. I know she's lost, she's gonna die. Used to give me supper in a $5 bill, sitting with the birds on the windowsill. I wish I could fly away